of Management Studies IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course Mmpc 011 titled Social Processes and Behavioral Issues for MBA Program. Presenting Block 2 titled Intrapersonal Processes. Unit 6 Perception and Attribution Part 2.
Social perception. Of particular interest in organizational behavior is the process of social perception or person perception. Person or social perception is the process by which individuals attribute characteristics or traits to other people. It is closely related to attribution, which will also be discussed in this unit later on. The concept of social perception has relevance to organizational behavior because here the object being perceived in the environment is another person, even though an understanding of perceptions of situation, events, and objects are important. It is the knowledge of individual differences in perception of other people which plays a crucial role in employee behavior in work environment. Thus, social perception is merely concerned with knowing how one individual perceives other individuals. We usually categorize factors that influence how a person perceives another in terms of A. Characteristics or attributes of the person being perceived, B. Characteristics of the perceiver, C. Situation or context within which the perception takes place. Characteristics of the perceiver. The profile of the perceiver can be A. If a person knows himself or herself, it will be easier for him or her to see others accurately. B. One's own characteristics affect the traits one is likely to see in others. C. People who accept themselves are more likely to see the positive aspects of other people. D. Perceiving others accurately is not a single skill. The above said characteristics of the perceiver can highly influence the way in which one perceives others. Characteristics of the perceived. There are also certain characteristics of the person being perceived which can influence the social perception process. The following are characteristics of the perceived, one which influences social perception. A. One gets influenced by the status of the person perceived. B. To simplify the viewer's perceptual activities, the person being perceived is usually put into two categories, status and role. C. The visible attributes of the person perceived also affect and influence the social perception process. Thus, it is such attributes which make the social perception a very complex phenomenon. It is important to note that usually one's social perception process is greatly influenced by one's own characteristics and also the characteristics of the other person. Let us take an example. For instance, if the marketing manager with a high self-esteem sees an attractive and pleasant regional manager is relocated to head office, the marketing manager is likely to perceive the regional manager in a favorable and positive frame of mind. But if the marketing manager was a person with average or low self-esteem, while the regional manager is confident and outspoken and aggressive, he or she may be perceived in a negative and unfavorable manner. Thus, attributes do play a significant role in social perception. Simply stated, very often we have the tendency to perceive others through the filters of our own image of ourselves. Situation. The setting or situation also influences one's perception about others. The situation may be particularly significant, especially while understanding first impressions or primary effects. For instance, when you happen to meet somebody for the first time in a 5-star hotel, accompanied by a well-known personality whom you admire and respect, such an association is likely to have a positive influence on your assessment of the new acquaintance. But if he or she is with someone whom you dislike intensely, you are likely to form a negative first impression. Of course, the initial perception may change over a period of time when you interact more with the person and get to know him or her better. Nevertheless, the first impression may come in the way to color your later perception of the individual. Problems in social perception. There are 4 common problems or errors which affect the social perception process, namely halo effect, stereotyping, projection, and expectancy. 1. Halo effect error. Evaluation of another person solely on the basis of one attribute, either favorable or unfavorable, is called the halo effect. This means the halo effect blinds the perceiver to take notice of the other attributes which also are to be considered if the evaluator has to obtain a complete and accurate impression of the other person. Managers have to make efforts to guard against the halo effect, especially during a preliminary interview with a prospective employee or rating an existing employee's job performance. One trait may be singled out and used for passing judgment on the performance of the individual. For instance, the interviewer may perceive a beautiful candidate to be suitable to be a personal secretary, though actually he or she may be a poor typist and bad secretary. Or an excellent attendance record may indicate perceptions of high productivity, quality work, and industriousness irrespective of whether this is accurate or not. 2. Stereotyping. Stereotyping refers to the tendency to assign attributes to a person solely on the basis of a category of people of which he or she is a member. People have a tendency to expect someone identified as a doctor, lawyer, or a politician to possess certain attributes even if they have met few others who did not have these attributes. Stereotyping often results in attributing favorable or unfavorable traits to the person being perceived. Very often the person may be aware of only the overall category to which the person being perceived belongs and is thus put into a stereotype. For instance, common man may refer to a politician saying, "He is a politician and hence will be corrupt." It can be inferred from this statement that what the common man may want to say was that because he belongs to the class of politicians, he can safely be labeled as corrupt. Stereotyping affects social perceptions in organizations where the most common stereotyped groups are managers, blue-collared workers, supervisors, administrative staff, and trade union members. 3. Projection. Under certain conditions, people tend to see in another person traits that they themselves possess. That is, they project their own feelings, tendencies, or motives into their judgment of others. This may be particularly true regarding undesirable traits which the perceiver possesses but fails to recognize in himself or herself. For example, an individual who is himself or herself not very energetic may see others as lazy or may explain their lack of achievement as resulting from their unwillingness to work hard. One who is dishonest may be suspicious of others and may perceive dishonest intentions in others where they do not exist. People who are afraid may interpret others' behavior as fearful or anxious. 4. Expectancy. Expectancy is a tendency to perceive people, objects, or events on the basis of what we expected them to be in the first place. It is sometimes referred to as Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion was a mythical Greek sculptor who made a statue of a girl that he wanted and made her come to life so that what sprang to life was what he expected. Through expectancy, one may create certain things in the work situation that he/she is expected to start with. This aspect is also known as self-fulfilling prophecy. Impression management. Impression management, sometimes also referred to as self-presentation, may be defined as an attempt by an individual to manipulate and control the impression that others form about them. In a simple way, impression management can be said to be the process by which people attempt to manage or control the perceptions formed by others. People have a tendency to present themselves in such a way that they seek to impress others in a socially desirable manner. Impression management plays an important part in understanding a person's perception. Impression management has two distinct facets. 1. Impression motivation, the degree to which an individual actively manages the impression that he or she makes. 2. Impression construction, how an individual has consciously chosen an image to convey and also on how he or she goes about doing that. Everybody is concerned about the impression that he or she makes on others. In organizations also, the employee may be motivated to control the way his or her superior perceives him or her. Of course, the extent of motivation to impression management will depend on the relevance of impressions to the person's goals, value of these goals, and the differences between the image one would like others to hold and the image one believes others already have. It is said that there are 5 factors which have relevance on the kinds of impression that people try to construct. These are self-concept, desired and undesired identity images, role constraints, target values, and current social image. However, there is only little information on how people select ways to manage others' perceptions of them. But there is no doubt about the fact that in organizations, the impression made on others may make significant implications on an employee's career. Impression management strategies. Here, we briefly touch upon 2 basic strategies used by employees to manage impressions. When an employee tries to minimize his or her responsibility for an unfavorable event, or say he/she wants to be out of trouble, he/she may use a demotion preventive strategy. On the other hand, when an employee wants to maximize responsibility for a favorable outcome or wants to portray a better image of himself or herself, then he or she may use a promotion enhancing strategy. The demotion preventive strategies may take the form of A. Justification of action. If not completed his or her work, the employee may try to justify himself or herself by saying that he/she was not keeping well. B. Forwarding an apology. The employee may apologize to the boss for some unfavorable happening and tries to impress upon his or her boss that he/she is extremely sorry for the occurrence and promises to see that it does not reoccur. C. Disassociation. When an employee is indirectly associated with something that went wrong, he/she will try to convey the impression that he/she was only distantly associated and in spite of being against the decision or action, was overpowered by others. Some of the promotion enhancing strategies can take the form of A. Entitlements. When an employee feels that he/she has not been given due credit for the work done, he/she will communicate either formally or informally his or her feelings to the people concerned. B. Enhancement. When an employee may have received credit but feels that he/she deserves more, he or she will highlight about how his or her efforts in the future can result in enhanced profits. C. Obstacles disclosure. Under this strategy, the employee is trying to create the perception that since his/her achievements have been on account of the big obstacles cleared by him/her, he deserves or she deserves more credit. D. Association. Here the employee tries to be seen with the right people at the right time to create the impression that he/she is well connected and associated with successful projects. The above strategies are adopted to build impressions and perceptions. Thus, employees have to be wary of such deliberate attempts at manipulation while evaluating people. Impression management has its impact on the success of getting a job and also on his or her career. It also has an influence on his or her relationships with others. Superiors feel better disposed towards those subordinates who manage to project better image. Impression management is not practiced only by individuals. Organizations also seek to create impressions. Called the corporate image, organizations gain considerably by this exercise. A good corporate image means better employees, expanded markets, and more responsive investors. Attribution. Attribution is the process by which we make sense of our environment through our perceptions of causality. An attribution, therefore, is a belief about the cause or causes of an event or an action. Fritz Heider and Harold Kelly developed attribution theory during 1950s and 60s. They stated that our understanding of our social world is based on our continual attempts at causal analysis based on how we interpret our experience. Why is that person so successful? Why did that project fail? If we understand the causes of success, failure, and conflict, we may be able to adjust our behavior and other factors accordingly. Attribution is simply the process of attaching or attributing causes or reasons to the actions and events we see. Causality is usually described in terms of internal causality and external causality. For example, we may explain a particular individual's success or promotion with reference to his/her superior skills and knowledge, or with reference to luck, friends in high places, and coincidence. In recent years, attribution theories have been playing an increasingly important role in work motivation, performance appraisal, and leadership, but are also recognized to influence perceptions. Attributions have been found to strongly affect evaluation of others' performance, to determine the manner in which supervisors behave towards subordinates, and to influence personal satisfaction with one's work. For example, what the manager perceives as the cause of a subordinate's behavior will affect the manager's perception of and resulting behavior toward the subordinate. Research has revealed patterns in our attributions. For instance, when we are explaining our personal achievements, we point to our capabilities. But when we are explaining our lack of success, we blame our circumstances. On the other hand, when speaking about others, we tend to attribute success and failure to personality features. In psychology, this tendency to exaggerate the influence of personality when explaining the behavior of others to overlook the effect of contextual factors is known as the fundamental attribution error. Attribution refers to the tendency one develops to explain the ways in which a person judges another person's behavior. Very often, we make attempts to understand the more lasting causes behind others' actions by interpreting their traits, motives, and intentions through the attribution process. Simply stated, an attribution is the complex process in which we observe others' behavior and try to infer causes behind it from various areas. With reference to social perception, there are types of attributions which people generally tend to make. These are A. Dispositional attributions, such as personality traits, motivation, or ability, or internal factors. B. Situational attribution, social influence of others, equipments, and so on, or external factors. The attribution theory makes attempt to explain how individuals, when observing behavior, attempt to determine whether it is internally or externally caused based on three factors. 1. Distinctiveness, 2. Consensus, and 3. Consistency. There are significant contributions from attribution theories, especially in the areas involving psychological and personality processes like motivation, performance appraisal, and leadership. Attribution theory has important implications for managers. If the manager attributes poor performance to internal factors, he or she can adopt certain strategies to improve those factors. On the other hand, if the manager attributes poor performance to external factors, he or she can take relevant steps relating to performance improvement. Let us take an example in an organizational setting. When the production manager notices the outstanding performance of his or her supervisor, the assessment of his or her performance will depend on the causes to which he/she attributes this performance. If he or she believes that the performance of the supervisor is on virtue of his or her competence and inner drive, he/she may praise him or her and also reward him or her. If the production manager believes that the performance is the result of using a newer and superior technology, he/she is likely to treat it in a different manner. This means that perceptions and the subsequent behaviors change depending upon whether internal or external situational attributes are made. One can make attribution to oneself. If one attributes pay raise to hard work, he or she continues to work hard. Instead, if poor performance is attributed to external factors, he or she may put more effort into cementing that friendship. The fundamental attribution error is A. The tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors when making judgments about the behavior of others. And B. The tendency for individuals to attribute their own success to internal factors while putting the blame for failures on external factors. Perception, errors and remedies. The main sources of errors in perception include 1. Not collecting enough information about other people. 2. Basing our judgments on information that is irrelevant or insignificant. 3. Seeing what we expect to see and what we want to see and not investigating further. 4. Allowing early information about someone to affect our judgment despite later and contradictory information. 5. Accepting stereotypes uncritically. 6. Allowing our own characteristics to affect what we see in others and how we judge them. 7. Attempting to decode non-verbal behavior outside the context in which it appears. 8. Basing attributions on flimsy and potentially irrelevant evidence. Thus, it is clear that errors in perception can be overcome by 1. Taking more time and avoiding instant or snap judgments about others. 2. Collecting and consciously using more information about other people. 3. Developing self-awareness and an understanding of how our personal biases or preferences affect our perceptions and judgments of other people. 4. Checking out attributions, particularly the links we make between aspects of personality and appearance on the one hand and behavior on the other. Therefore, it can be said that if we are to improve our understanding of others, we must first have a well-developed knowledge of ourselves, our strengths, our preferences, our weakness, and our biases. The development of self-knowledge can be an uncomfortable process. In organizational settings, we are often constrained in the expression of our feelings, positive and negative, about other people due to social or cultural norms and to the communication barriers erected by status and power differentials. This may in part explain the enduring emphasis in recent years on training courses in social and interpersonal skills, self-awareness, and personal growth. Adrian Fernham argues that the process of making evaluations, judgments, or ratings of the performance of employees is subject to a number of systematic perception errors. This is particularly problematic in a performance appraisal context. These are 1. Central tendency, appraising everyone at the middle of the rating scale. 2. Contrast error, basing an appraisal on comparison with other employees rather than on established performance criteria. 3. Different from me, giving a poor appraisal because the person has qualities or characteristics not possessed by the appraiser. 4. Halo effect, appraising an employee undeservedly on one quality because he/she is perceived highly by the appraiser on another quality. 5. Horn effect, the opposite of the halo effect, giving someone a poor appraisal on one quality influences poor rating on other qualities. 6. Initial impression, basing an appraisal on first impressions rather than on how the person has behaved throughout the period to which appraisal relates. 7. Latest behavior, basing an appraisal on the person's recent behavior. 8. Lenient or generous rating, perhaps the most common error being consistently generous in appraisal mostly to avoid conflict. 9. Performance dimension error, giving someone a similar appraisal on two distinct but similar qualities because they happen to follow each other on the appraisal form. 10. Same as me, giving a good appraisal because the person has qualities or characteristics possessed by the appraiser. 11. Spillover effect, basing this appraisal, good or bad, on the results of the previous appraisal rather than on how the person has behaved during the appraisal period. 12. Status effect, giving those in higher level positions consistently better appraisals than those in lower level jobs. 13. Strict rating, being consistently harsh in appraising performance. Perception and its application in organizations. People in organizations are always assessing others. Managers must appraise their subordinates' performance, evaluate how co-workers are working. When a new person joins a department, he or she is immediately assessed by the other person. These have important effect on the organization. 1. Employment interview. Interviewers make perceptual judgments that are often inaccurate. Different interviewers see different things in the same candidate and arrive at different conclusions about the applicant. Employment interview is an important input into the hiring decision And perceptual factors influence who is hired and, vis-a-vis, the quality of an organization's labor force. 2. Performance appraisals. An employee's performance appraisal is very much dependent on the perceptual process. An employee's future is closely tied to his or her appraisal. Promotions, increments, and continuation of employment are among the common outcomes. The performance appraisal represents an assessment of an employee's work. While this may be objective, most jobs are evaluated in subjective impression of an employee's work. To the degree that the managers use subjective measures in appraising employees, the evaluator perceives to be good or bad employee characteristics or behaviors will significantly influence the appraisal outcome. 3. Assessing level of efforts. In many organizations, the level of an employee's effort is given high importance. Assessment of an individual's effort is a subjective judgment susceptible to perceptual distortions and bias. 4. Assessing loyalty. Another important judgment that managers decide about employees is whether they are loyal to the organization. Implications of perception on performance and satisfaction. 1. Productivity. What an individual perceives from their work situation will influence their productivity. More than the situation itself, than whether a job is actually interesting or challenging, is not relevant. How a manager successfully plans and organizes the work of his or her subordinates and actually helps them in structuring their work is far less important than how his or her subordinates perceive his or her effects. Therefore, to be able to influence productivity, it is necessary to assess how workers do jobs. 2. Absenteeism and turnover. Absence and turnover are some of the reactions to the individual's perception. Managers must understand how each individual interprets his or her job and where there is a significant difference between what is seen and what exists and try to eliminate the distortions. Failure to deal with the differences when individuals perceive the job in negative terms will result in increased absenteeism and turnover. 3. Job satisfaction. Job satisfaction is a highly subjective and feeling of the benefits that derive from the job. Clearly, his/her variable is critically linked to the perception. If job satisfaction is to be improved, the worker's perception of the job characteristics, supervision, and the organization as a whole must be positive. Understanding the process of perception is important because 1. It is unlikely that any person's definition of reality will be identical to an objective assessment of reality. 2. It is unlikely that two different persons' definition of reality will be exactly the same. 3. Individual perceptions directly influences the behavior exhibited in a given situation. The important fact is that people who work together often see things differently, and this difference can create problems in their ability to work together effectively. In order to decrease the errors involved in perception, one has to keep in mind the way the perceptual process works. By understanding the process, one can do a better job at minimizing their negative effect. Secondly, one can compare one's perception with other people. If they are representing different backgrounds, cultures, or training, this may lead to agreements or otherwise. Communications can help to sort out the differences. Thirdly, one should understand other person's point of view. It may help to know when one is wrong. The point is that one should listen and understand the other person rather than try to convince him or her that one is right. Fourthly, one should be willing to change when one comes across new information. Finally, one should view the world in dynamic terms because one's behavior can alter the phenomenon that is the basis for one's perceptions. So, one must notice the impact of one's own behavior. In short, it can be said that perceptual skills can be enhanced by 1. Knowing and perceiving oneself accurately. 2. Being emphatic, that is, to see a situation as it is experienced by others. 3. Having positive attitudes, which helps in reduction of perceptual distortions. 4. Enhancing one's self-concept, which helps in perceiving more accurately. 5. Making a conscious effort to avoid the possible common biases in perception. 6. Communicating with employees to erase incorrect perceptions. 7. Avoiding attributions. Perception is an important process in an organization. It plays a vital role in forming the basis of one's behavior by which one formulates a view of the world. Summary. 1. Perception is the act of seeing what is there to be seen. 2. Perception refers to the process of receiving stimuli, selecting, grouping, understanding, and reaction to the external stimuli. 3. Perception is influenced by the object of perception, the perceiver, and the situation in which the process occurs. 4. A person's needs, habits, impact of past experience, ethics and values, attitudes and personality all influence the perception process. 5. Perceptual process comprises 5 important stages: A. Receiving, B. Selecting, C. Organizing, D. And E. Reacting to the stimuli. 6. Each stage in the perceptual process is influenced by several factors. 7. Perception plays spoilsport with human behavior. 8. Barrier like stereotyping, halo effect, projection, attribution, and self-fulfilling prophecy distort perception. 9. Halo effect refers to the tendency of perceiving people in terms of good or bad and assigning all good qualities to one who is good and bad qualities to the one who is bad. 10. Stereotyping, one of the most common barriers in accurately perceiving others, is a tendency to classify people and events into already known or perceived general categories. 11. Projection refers to a tendency for individuals to see their own traits in others. 12. Expectancy is the extent to which prior expectations bias perceptions of events, object, and other persons. 13. Perceptual defense is the tendency among people to protect themselves against ideas, objects, or situations that may seem to be threatening. 14. Being an important variable in individual behavior, perception needs to be managed effectively. 15. Social perception is the process of understanding other people accurately. 16. Perceptual organization is the process by which people group stimuli into patterns. 17. Figure ground principle states that the perceived object or person or event stands out distinct from its background and occupies the cognitive space of the individual. 18. Perceptual grouping includes similarity, proximity, closure, continuity, and area. 19. Previously held beliefs about objects influence an individual's perception of similar objects is called perceptual set. 20. Role of perception is more felt in performance assessment of employees. 21. Impression management refers to the calculated efforts to get others to think of them in the best possible way. 22. Attribution is a corollary of perception. 23. Attribution has implications for perception, leadership, and motivation. 24. Attribution theory refers to the process in which people interpret the reasons or causes for their behavior. 25. Attribution theory suggests that we observe behavior and then attribute causes to it, that is, we attempt to explain why people behave as they do.
We were listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies IGNOU for MBA program. Course code Mmpc 011, titled Social Processes and Behavioral Issues. Course Coordinator Professor Srilata. Voiceover by Renuka. Edited by Ashok Sharma. Program assisted by Tarannum Jahan. Program produced by Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.